Hi, AJ Hartley here, novelist, Shakespeare professor, fan of various aspects of Japanese culture and of good TV. And those two things come together today in the show that I'm going to talk about, La Grande Maison Tokyo from 2019.
3年前の首脳会談のアレルギー食材の混入事故、大事な会談をぶち壊したシェフ尾花夏樹は日本の恥だ。でもすっごく美味しい。
レストランやらない俺と一緒に。
ワクワクするだろう。
世界最高のグランメゾンを東京に作る。
三つ星狙うんだったら三つ星。ようこそグランメゾン東京。
This is a TBS show. It stars Takuya Kimura as Natsuki Obana and Kyoka Suzuki as Rinko Hayami. It's directed by Ayuko Tsukahara. And the premise of the show is that the core team are the chefs at a French restaurant in Paris a couple of years ago. And they are at a 2-star Michelin restaurant. The Michelin star system is a way of ranking top restaurants in the world. Natsuki Obana is a chef working at this restaurant. He has this team underneath him. The restaurant gets selected to be the venue for a high-end diplomatic event, and it goes badly because one of the top diplomats has an allergic reaction to one of the ingredients, which they were warned about, and somebody either makes a mistake or it's done on purpose. There's a lot of talk about the possibility of some sort of terrorist attack, and the Japanese staff particularly are targeted. It blows up, there's a fight, and the result is that Obana is effectively blackballed. He's thrown out not just of Paris, but out of the entire sort of culinary scene. In the meantime, he meets up with Rinko, who is an aspiring female chef who's trying to get a Michelin star. And he decides to team up with her, and she will be the head chef of a new restaurant in Tokyo, La Grande Maison Tokyo, as it eventually becomes. They're going to assemble a team of their best chefs, many of whom come from the prior restaurant in Paris. But there's a huge stigma attached to Obana, and he's particularly targeted by a French foodie writer with whom he had a previous romantic relationship. And she makes it her mission to make sure that he never gets accepted back into the culinary scene and that they never achieve the success that they're going for. From that point on, the show is set in Tokyo, and it's a food show, but unlike something like Makanai or Midnight Diner, this focuses on high-end dining in the French tradition. The idea is that these guys are trying to make this incredible Japanese French restaurant. So one of the things that's fascinating about it, of course, is trying to navigate that particular niche in a very Japanese way. As is always the case with these shows, part of what I find fascinating about them is the way that they reflect upon their own Japaneseness. And there are a number of ways that this show does that, not least in its pursuit of something specifically Tokyo, which is at the top of a global tradition which is generally measured in European terms. I remember, back when I lived in Yamanashi, and Yamanashi is a huge wine producer, and there was always this competition about, this anxiety about the extent to which Japanese wine could be recognized for its own merit rather than as a sort of pale imitation of French wine. And some of that tension runs through here. The restaurant is attempting to, in some ways, out-French the French. But at the same time, they recognize that there are certain things that they're not going to be able to deliver. And so one of the things that they start to do, for example, is foregrounding specifically Japanese ingredients and trying to make the best out of the things that they can get which they think are world class. Certain kinds of vegetables, certain kinds of game, meat, and of course fish. But there's this constant tension about becoming, in some ways, too Japanese, that they still need to sort of maintain the spirit of the Frenchness and the elegance and the incredibly complicated preparations and such that go into it. One of the things that the food has, of course, in a show like this is that it is exquisite to look at. Food shows are always tricky because we can't actually taste what they're tasting. So when people get excited about the food, we have to sort of just trust them. At least with this, the food looks absolutely picture perfect. It's beautifully done. And one of the nice little details I heard about the filming of the show was that several of the actors had to train within a sort of top quality Parisian French restaurant in order to convincingly make the food. And the lead actor who plays Obana actually makes pretty much all the food in the show that he, as a character, produces. I think this is sort of fascinating because, again, as I've said with regard to other shows, it reinforces that very sort of method, realism. You know, how do you enthuse about the food that you make? By sort of developing not just your skill set, but your palate for the preparation of the food themselves. So there's a sort of a realness to it. And one of the things that I think is really cool about the show is that as they're constantly sort of raising the ante in terms of what they're trying to achieve, it does not come easily, that it's a battle and you see as much failure as you do success, which I really like. There's a kind of hopefulness at the heart of the show, I think, that says, you know, hard work and talent will pay off. Though, and I'm not giving anything away about the ending, in their pursuit to get 3 stars, we also have to confront the reality that these things are not objective. And even if we can convince ourselves that they are, that you can meet certain particular criteria and certain standards and measurements in order to achieve the top, you're still at the mercy of the political and personal and financial machinations of those involved in the process. And that talent, taste, skill, work will not necessarily carry the day. And I think one of the thematic currents within the show is that while ostensibly we're constantly going for the top prize, the 3 Michelin stars, which is the core of the character's mission, there's also a running preoccupation with the idea that maybe in a way, that's not the goal. What the goal is to make great food with great people for a specific community. And that in some ways, the Michelin star serves as a way to achieve that, though at times may get in the way of it as well, you know. So, you know, it's an upbeat, positive show about people working together where the stakes are comparatively low, right? I mean, that this is not a sort of murder mystery kind of thing. But one of the things I like about it is the idea that you can have a show where it feels, everything that they're doing feels important, even if what's on the line is really only the survival of the restaurant, the survival of their relationships, which are important things, right? Especially in like real life, these are important things. Maybe not on TV where it's all about, you know, surviving the next bullet. But this is not that kind of show, which I find quite appealing, particularly at the moment where I think sometimes, you know, we can have too much grit and grimness. As I say, it's a TBS show and it follows a particular kind of model, which we see in subsequent shows like Unnatural and MIU 404, where there's a very similar kind of structural model where there's a sort of backstory with some sort of mystery or crime, which is going to get kind of unraveled in the course of the season. And that has a knock-on effect on the relationships. It also features, a maverick, difficult, genius guy. This is a staple of a lot of Japanese TV shows. The head chef, who is in some ways the best at what he does, but who's a pain in the ass to deal with and has to be sort of navigated and sweet-talked and cajoled and persuaded because he's outside social norms. He doesn't behave in the way that most Japanese people behave, but you need him around because he has a particular kind of talent. I think one of the things that makes this show unusual is that it ultimately centers on Rinko, the female chef, who is actually running everything and who is using Obana as a sous chef, so that it means that ultimately it's her say. It's her call, even though he is the star chef, he's the more experienced. And again, not giving too much away, this is going to come to a head late in the show when she's going to have to make some decisions which may not go along with his particular approach. The director said that she thought of the show as being like Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, or the US adaptation, The Magnificent Seven, which might sound like an odd thing to connect it to, since those are sort of action movies. But what's interesting is that the reason she said that was because she saw it as being about the core samurai leader, whose mission is not simply to protect the village from bandits. These people have come to him and asked him to help look after the village. But that his mission is to make himself unnecessary. So in coming in and bringing his samurai companions to protect the village, the real mission is to empower the village to protect itself. And whatever his combat skills are, his real skill is the assembly and training of the team. And that's what is going on in La Grande Maison Tokyo, where Obana's mission ultimately is to make the restaurant function without him. He's still a curmudgeon and a pain in the ass, but there is a kind of through line that justifies that. And this being a Japanese TV show, this doesn't get spelled out in overt dialogue. It's something you have to kind of infer as you go. Like those other TBS shows, sometimes I find the incidental music a little heavy-handed, and they tend to do that repeating of a single song which shows up in the last 7 or 8 minutes of the episode. So it's a formula that they have honed and which works well. The character work is terrific. Sometimes the plotting creaks a little. There are some shifts of allegiance that to me were not completely explained and felt slightly convenient. And I wondered if we needed all 11 episodes to get to where we finish up. But I really liked it. It was a relaxing but intense, if that paradox works, way to spend my time. And I thought it was beautiful to watch. And I love the focus on craft, on expertise, on training. That I get so frustrated with some like reality cooking shows and things where people are sort of throwing things at the wall and just seeing what happens, and we celebrate people who haven't paid their dues. I love the attention to detail in the way that these people prepare the food, and the fact that the food is supposed to convey their passion, right? That's something of their personality and their sort of deep emotional investment. Again, outside language, right? That this is the way these people communicate. They communicate through food in this sort of exquisite, absolutely meticulously prepared, beautiful dinner courses. It's lovely to watch. I think you might really enjoy it. There's a spin-off which I haven't seen about one of the secondary characters, which is a sort of a rom-com, I guess. And there is a new movie which I have not seen yet, which came out at the end of last year. I'm not certain where I can see it, in which I think they open another restaurant in Paris. But I like this. It's really good. Check it out. And as ever, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out my books, of course. Check out my Patreon page. Thank you to my patrons who keep this channel operational and get an early look at all my videos. Check out my little Dashery store for shirts and mugs and things like that. And I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.